Honeymoon Hotspot workers, what are the most insane things you've witnessed newlyweds do? Story 1. I used to work events at a high-end venue that hosted conferences and wedding receptions. To give you an idea, there was a 1 to 2 year waiting list for wedding receptions, and the cheapest plan or menu was $300 per person. Being a hotel, the bride and groom stayed in a room on the night of their wedding. I was propositioned more times than I can count. Once, every staff member was handed a photo with instructions: do not allow this person to enter and call security immediately. It was the groom's mother. Apparently, she hated the bride so much that they had put an AVO apprehended violence order out on her. It took 3 police officers to get her into the police car, and she even bit one of the security staff. There was a bride so drunk that they refused to let her sign the marriage certificate. The ceremony and reception went ahead, but the marriage officially happened the next day when she was sober. The most memorable part was during the reception. The bride's father was paying for it, and the groom had requested a few projectors to show a movie and photo montage of their relationship. Everything went fine for the first 5 minutes, until the video hit a scene of the bride being pounded by 2 guys, neither of whom was the groom. One of them was the best man to this day. I still don't know who the other guy was. During the video, the groom had already left in a cab. One other time, a newlywed couple had a cab scheduled to the airport. We called their room 30 minutes beforehand as a courtesy. No answer. The manager went to knock. Still no reply, so he used the house key. There they were, the couple asleep, the bride still in her wedding dress, and the groom half in his suit, both covered in vomit. And so many people have tried the classic "we're on our honeymoon, please give us freebies" line. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I was in Mexico with my mother and sister. As we were walking down an outdoor path at the resort, we saw a young girl crying with her frantic boyfriend following behind. Both of them were covered in cuts and bruises, surrounded by security and medical staff, and of course, they were on their honeymoon. I asked one of the staff what had happened. Turns out the couple had been doing the deed on their balcony and fell off. Luckily, it wasn't too high off the ground, but it was high enough to leave them banged up and shaken. Story 3. A Christian couple I know had never done it before their wedding night. The groom wanted to break the ice, so he got ready while his bride was in the suite bathroom on their honeymoon. He spread eagle and aimed his back door toward the bathroom door. When she came out, he farted, but accidentally did more than just a fart in the bed. She locked herself in the bathroom for 7 hours, crying. They're fine now, but she wanted a divorce that night. Story 4. I worked nights at the Anniversary Inn in Salt Lake City, Utah through college. To save you a search, it's an overpriced, themed inn that Mormon newlyweds absolutely go bat-crap crazy for. Want to spend your wedding night in a pirate ship? They've got you covered. Egyptian tombs? Yep. Over the years, I witnessed many Mormon cherries popped while on shift, along with a ton of really weird, funny, and sometimes sad stories. Funny story: about 20 minutes after an obviously nervous newlywed couple checked in, the husband opened the door and yelled, "Banging is awesome." He kept doing it multiple times throughout the night, and it made us laugh every single time. Weird, creepy story. One time, a dad drove a newlywed couple to the inn and then came in to help them check in. Their kids were clearly adults, so I already thought this was unusual. Once they were checked in, the dad gave them a mini lecture about the sanctity and spirituality of intimacy, explaining that what they were going to do that night and throughout their honeymoon would echo throughout the eternities. Super creepy. Sad story. More than once we'd have brides come running from their rooms in robes, sobbing and completely delirious. They weren't ready for it, and it was clearly a traumatic experience for them. I always felt really bad for them, because it must be incredibly difficult for someone who has been taught that doing it before marriage is evil, to suddenly flip a switch and be expected to do it overnight. Story 5. I bartended at an upscale lodge in Texas that catered mostly to oil money and wealthy folks from the DFW area. One lady came in, probably 35, decent looking with a nice body. She wasn't exactly a newlywed, but had been married 6 months earlier. Her husband cheated, and she left him. After about 4 martinis, she started spilling her guts. She said they had only done it maybe 10 times as a married couple, and that she missed the feel of a man, really laying it on thick about how she needed some. I playfully flirted with her as a bartender, gave her a free drink, and paid her good attention. It got to be about midnight. Bar closed at 12 and she asked if I could have a drink in her room with her when I got off. I told her I couldn't do that. The place had very strict rules and I was making decent money. After a few minutes, I decided the story might be worth it and told her that if she ordered room service, I could deliver it in a few minutes. There was an end-of-night walk I was supposed to do, which usually took 20 to 30 minutes, but I figured I could skip it and help out this divorcee. She drunkenly nodded and walked away. After about 15 minutes, we got the order for strawberries to her room. I prepped them, got ready to go, and told the manager I was going to do the night walk as well. About 15 minutes later, I got to her door. It was slightly open, so I knocked and walked in. There she was on the bed with another guy, a really fat hotel guest she must have picked up. Neither of them noticed me at all. I set down the strawberries and walked out. Story 6. I live in Las Vegas, and I used to work at one of the major casinos on the Strip. One night, during a wedding reception at one of our clubs, one of my employees told me he heard multiple people inside a bathroom stall. The stalls had full doors, so you couldn't see any feet, but you could definitely hear some debauchery going on. I called security, and they asked the people inside to open the door. So out comes a groomsman, followed by the bride, followed by the best man, and finally the groom. They then walked right back to the reception like nothing had ever happened.
Story 7. I don't work at a honeymoon hotspot, but over winter break I went on a cruise. My cousins and I met a couple on their honeymoon. The husband was pretty chill, and the wife seemed really nice too. I think they were in their 20s. He was about 27, and she was 24. I was drunk the whole cruise, so I may be off. We hung out with them almost every night, partying and drinking at the bar. On the last night, my oldest cousin went to bed early, so it was just me and my other cousin. Around 2 a.m., we were just chilling, enjoying food and being all drunk when the wife suddenly stumbled into the restaurant and sat with us. She told us her husband had gone to bed and that she was lonely. We openly invited her to join us, and that's when she completely opened up. She started talking about how she was in the mood and how she had been keeping her eye on us. At first, we thought she was joking, but then she turned to us and said that if she weren't recently married, she would have loved to be with my cousin and me. We didn't know what to do, so we just walked her back to her room and said goodnight. I really felt bad for her husband. She tried to apologize to us the next day, but my cousin got mad and told her she better get her act together. For context, my cousin is 23, and I am 20. Story 8. Okay, so I work at a high-end all-inclusive hotel in Southern California. Honeymooners often come here, and for some reason, things always seem to get really weird, possibly because I know one of my coworkers sells Molly. One night, around 3 a.m., we get a room service request. They wanted mustard, ketchup, and a bun. To be clear, they did not ask for a hot dog. Being all about customer service, I went into the kitchen, grabbed all the items, and brought them up to the room. I knocked once, no answer. Twice, still nothing. On the third knock, someone finally answered. I handed them the mustard, ketchup, and bun on a platter. Then the guy ripped the top off the bun, grabbed it, whipped out his dong, and stuck it in the bun. The new wife grabbed the ketchup and mustard and dumped it all over it. They both started hysterically laughing and closed the door. I was at a loss for words for hours, so I guess they got me pretty good. Story 9. I am a wedding photographer, and a groom recently returned from his honeymoon told me the story of how he got his $15,000 honeymoon free of charge. He and his brand new wife had just checked into the honeymoon suite of a palatial island resort after a long flight from London. After showering, they retired to the bed to, well, celebrate their new union. Once the throes of passion had subsided, the groom noticed the drapes by the window moving. He jumped up, pulled them aside, and discovered a bellhop concealed there doing, you guessed it, a little solo performance. Naturally, they complained. The manager, eager to minimize the damage, fired the employee on the spot and essentially gave them the full stay free in exchange for agreeing not to take the incident any further. Story 10. A couple came into my camera shop during the old days of film and explained that they were honeymooning and were concerned that their roll of pictures of the honeymoon just kept going for some reason, like way past the 36 frames. When I told them there was no film in the camera, the honeymoon ended right there for the poor husband whose job it was to load the camera. If looks could kill. Story 11. I used to work at the Hilton Hotel near Disney, and there was a newlywed couple that had come down from their room and said they had just gotten married, and they were looking for the nearest topless bar. I was confused as to how forward they were and why they would want to spend their wedding night at that bar. so I directed them down a sleazy part of town and told them there were plenty down a specific road. Later, I was so shocked I told my coworker what had just happened and what they were looking for. He then called me an idiot and said they probably asked for a tapas bar. Well, crap, that was the first time I had heard of said place and never knew they existed or were called that. Story 12. I work evening maintenance at a resort, and we get a call that a room has a light bulb out. Cool, something to do. I hop on my one-speed golf cart and head to the room with a light bulb in hand. When I arrive, I knock on the door and announce, "Maintenance." I hear a man say, "Come in." So I grab my key card, swipe in, and lo and behold, the hairiest Russian guy and his smoking hot wife jump from the bed, buttoning themselves, eyes wide like deer in headlights. I spun around, eyes glued to the floor, apologized, and stepped outside. A moment later, Harry the Russian opens the door. Instead of going in to change the bulb, I just hand it to him with a quick, "Here you go," and make a fast exit. Later, after some thought, I realized he had probably said coming, but I misheard through all the chest hair and the accent. Story 13. A while back, long ago, I worked at a 4-star hotel. A couple came in for their honeymoon, but had forgotten to bring protection. They didn't have any in their room, and the public restroom on the first floor was out. The guy, in a rather eager voice, asked me where he could get some contraception. I told him I'd take care of it. I went to the staff bathroom, grabbed 4 rubbers at $2 each. Yes, we get them cheaper, and brought them to him. He was so grateful he gave me $100 as a tip. Edit, it really wasn't beyond what was my responsibility at the hotel at the time. Also, yes, we do have rubber dispensers in nice hotels where I am from. Probably some city regulation, and they're very high quality. And by eager voice, I mean you could feel the tension. Story 14. I work at a hotel restaurant. One day we hosted a wedding reception for a young couple who paid for an open bar. The party was a blast. People got wasted and had tons of fun. Around 2 a.m., the bride and groom and their closest friends finally left the restaurant to go back to their room. Apparently, they decided to all hang out in a room for a while and continue the party. From what I heard, at some point the maid of honor called the bride a lesbian, and the groom socked the said maid in the face. She ran, screaming, to the front desk and called the police. The groom was arrested and taken to jail on his wedding night for assaulting the maid of honor. 1 year later, the couple returned to the restaurant for their anniversary. They were super cool and seemed really happy. Story 15. Not honeymoon related, but I worked overnight at a hotel, which pretty much involved me sitting at a desk watching twerk videos until the phone rang. A guy called to complain about room 114 because the guy was watching porn on full volume. This was the usual routine for me. Every Saturday, this guy would rent the same damn room, and I'd get a noise complaint that he was watching porn too loud. I would go and bang on the door, no one would answer, and he'd settle down for a bit, then start back up. Then the phone would ring again with another complaint, and I'd have to compot the room for his unfortunate neighbor. Well, tonight, I was fed up. I kept banging and screamed, "I know you're in there, this is getting old. Open up!" After a few minutes, the door opened up to reveal a camera on a tripod, a woman in bed, and him with a camera in hand. He told me he shoots corn here, and that's what the noise was. He asked me if I ever wanted to bang one of his girls. I must have turned temporarily retarded because that's the only logical reason I said, "No thanks." He offered me a $50 tip to continue to allow him to film at our facility because the last place kicked him out. For the rest of my time there, he got complimentary upgrades to our suites every Saturday. TLDR, I am the reason for those editing cuts in corn films.
Story 16. I got married in Hawaii, and we were staying at a swanky resort. Late one afternoon, my wife was getting out of the shower while I was lying in bed in my boxers after a long day at the beach. Out of nowhere, I heard the front door open. I thought it was my wife, and she thought it was me. But in walked a couple with luggage and a key card in hand asking what we were doing in their room. Needless to say, the front desk had made a huge mistake. We were upgraded to an oceanfront suite for the rest of our stay, given free meals, and had half of our bill compept. Story 17. I was serving at a wedding a few years ago that definitely falls into the most embarrassing category. It was the part of the reception where everyone was giving speeches and toasts. When we weren't serving, we were expected to line up in a specific way. So I was standing across the room facing the bridal party. The bride's mother got up and gave a very touching speech about how she wished the grandmother had been able to see the wedding and what a beautiful bride her daughter was. Then she pulled out a box and said she had something from Grandma.
She pulls out this old doll, the kind with the huge fluffy dress people use as decoration on a bed, and hands it to the bride. The bride lights up and tells everyone how she always loved this doll as a kid and had wondered what happened to it after Grandma passed away. The photographer steps up to capture the moment, and just as the bride poses with the doll, a little silver ball on a cord falls out from underneath the dress. At first I had no idea what it was, but the bride picked it up to look, then immediately freaked out and dropped it, which set the crowd buzzing. One of my coworkers leaned over and explained it to me. It was a vibrating egg. Probably Grandma's. To this day, I still wonder what kind of photos, if any, the photographer managed to capture at that exact moment. Story 18. I worked as a bartender at a pretty nice hotel. There was a big convention center attached, with lots of meeting rooms and a huge ballroom. I wasn't always aware of what was happening there unless the hotel was full for a convention. It had been a fairly quiet night, and I didn't have anyone else at the bar when a guy took a seat and ordered a beer. I got it for him and he looked upset, like something was really weighing on him, but I didn't want to pry. Some people don't always want to talk. This guy did. He said, "Aren't bartenders supposed to listen to your problems?" I replied, "Sure, man. What do you want to talk about?" He began telling me that he had gotten married that day. They had the reception next door and were staying the night in the hotel. I congratulated him, but was a bit confused as to why he was sitting alone on his wedding night. He explained that he was in his 30s and his bride was 26. They had been together for at least a year and a half. She was a virgin, and he was not. I was still confused as to why he wasn't consummating his new marriage. He explained that his bride had been so nervous about their big night that she drank too much champagne and had passed out in the room after getting sick. I had to take a second to keep my composure and not chuckle at this poor guy's misfortune. He was clearly really upset. He explained that they were taking a flight the next day and then going on a cruise for their honeymoon. I did my best to reassure him and stay optimistic, saying something about nerves and that I was sure everything would work out for him on the cruise. He seemed a little better than when he first sat down, but he still looked frustrated, and who could blame him? He ordered another beer and went back to his room. Story 19. One time, a couple who had just gotten married spent their wedding night with us before flying out the next day for their honeymoon. We made sure the room was perfect, even comping them some champagne. Then, at about 1 a.m., we got several complaints from the surrounding rooms that they were screaming at each other. Not ecstatic, "Yeah, baby," kind of screams. More like, "Yeah, go ahead and cry, you friggin' bish," kind of screams. Our protocol in such situations is to call the cops for a domestic dispute. It turned out the groom had punched through our wall. He was arrested, and she spent her wedding night alone. Great foundation for a marriage. Story 20. I worked at a fancy Italian restaurant. The customer washrooms were spacious, especially the handicap stall. The staff, of course, had their own cramped, unpleasant bathroom, which I hated using. One day, I quietly snuck into the luxury men's room and overheard a bizarre conversation. "It's so long. Drop it in. Drop it in," a man said with obvious glee. "Are you sure, darling? It's really long," a woman replied. "You know I love them long," he answered. Then came a gurgle, followed by laughter. "Now the meatball," he said. "You want the big juicy meatballs?" she replied, trying to sound sexy. Confused and slightly disgusted, I looked around. I didn't see anything until I carefully stood on the toilet to peek over the stall wall. At the other end of the room, a woman's hand was raised, dangling a spaghetti strand. She dropped it. He laughed, wanting more. Eventually, she started dropping meatballs. By the end, there was spaghetti and meatballs all over the floor of the handicap stall, along with a pile of wedding clothes in one corner. Story 21. I have no idea whether these were newlyweds or not, but let's just pretend they were for the sake of storytelling. I worked in a fairly high-class hotel in the banquets division. One particular morning, we were hosting a breakfast reception for about 200 people, and the organizers wanted a stage for handing out awards or whatever. Thankfully, the evening crew had already set up most of the room. I arrived first, still half asleep, and walked in to turn on the lights. That's when I saw movement near the stage. Some guy popped up behind it. In retrospect, I am guessing he was without clothes, but all I could see was his bare chest. It was 5 a.m., and my brain immediately short-circuited. I guess he was working late last night and early this morning, and decided it was easier to just sleep here. In my defense, I am nearsighted and couldn't make out his face. I waved. He stared at me and disappeared behind the stage again. I shrugged it off and decided I should start cutting lemons, so I left the room. 15 minutes later, I heard screams from the ballroom. After a quick mental debate about my life choices and whether I was getting paid enough for this, I went to investigate. My manager was cursing up a storm and calling security. Think of the "ain't nobody got time for dat lady," but multiplied by 510, and you'll get an idea of her fury. The guy had now gathered his clothes and might have passed for dressed. Whimpering came from underneath the stage. I stared, my brain ticking away. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Finally, it clicked. They were doing it under the stage. My manager realized I was there and muttered, "Can you believe this? Security showed up. This is the best part. The girl somehow managed to get her clothes on and hightailed it out of there as fast as possible." The security guard turned to the guy and went full-on lecture mode. How immature he was, how this wasn't appropriate behavior. Who did he think he was? "Are you proud of yourself, son?" "Yeah, I kind of am," I replied. At that point, I wanted to high-five him, but neither touching his hand nor getting chewed out by my boss seemed like an attractive idea so early in the morning. Story 22. I live in one of the East Coast's most sought-after wedding destinations. A couple of years ago, a newlywed couple rented a moped, which, on an island that's almost entirely sand, is a terrible idea. Despite the risks, many people rent mopeds, and there is usually at least one fatality each summer. While riding on one of the main cross-island roads, they decided to kiss. They veered off the road and slammed into a telephone pole. The newlywed wife, who had just earned her PhD, was driving, and her husband's weight crushed her against the pole, and she passed away instantly. Her husband remains in a persistent vegetative state and likely will be for the rest of his life. They were just beginning what should have been a beautiful life together, and just like that, it was gone. Story 23. I live on Maui and used to work at Enterprise, car rental. Once I had a new job lined up, I could pretty much get away with anything. One newlywed couple had reserved an economy car but wanted to upgrade to a Mustang convertible. It was supposed to be an extra $100 per day, which the guy clearly couldn't afford based on the look on his face when I told him. But I gave it to them for free, mainly because there was sand in the front seat that I didn't feel like vacuuming. They jumped up and down, hugged me, and said I had made their honeymoon. Story 24. I work at a high-end couples retreat that often hosts honeymooners. I guess this falls more on the best side of the stories. Every time this one particular couple came to breakfast or dinner, the very attractive woman would always be wearing see-through tops with no inners. When I delivered food to their room on multiple occasions, she'd either answer the door in her inners or be under the covers in bed. I've also had a few drunken honeymooners invite me back to their rooms for drinks, but I've never taken them up on the offer. I'd like to keep my job. Story 25. One time at LAX airport, I saw a couple vehemently arguing all the way up to the boarding pass counter. Accusations flying about seat changes, flight plans, you name it. But the moment they reached the counter, they suddenly switched gears and cheerfully explained to the flight attendant that they were on their way to their honeymoon and needed to check their seats. Story 26. I frequent a natural hot spring in Alaska that gets a lot of Asian tourists and newlyweds during winter. The hot springs create huge steam clouds, so visibility is very low while wading in the waist-high water. Apparently, newlyweds from Japan, I think, believe that consummating their marriage under the northern lights will give them a male child. So they come to the hot springs in the middle of winter when it's dark and do it in the water. It's really strange to be there, just waiting around, and accidentally run into a couple of tourists in the midst of their intimate moment in the water. Story 27. I worked as a guest service agent and bellman at a nice hotel chain. One weekend, during a wedding in one of our banquet rooms, I was befriended by a groomsman, a chubby little guy, very nice nonetheless. He participated in a few staged wedding shots around the hotel and so on. After getting to know them a little, I realized the entire group of bridesmaids and groomsmen were very close. The chubby little guy in particular was especially close to the bride. I thought nothing of it at the time. Later that evening, as the reception was underway, I was paged by the front desk to check a room that had called in distress. Pages like this weren't unusual on a wild Saturday night. I grabbed security and headed up to the room. The groomsman I had befriended earlier had attempted self-harm. The call for help had actually come from his mother, who lived in the same city. She was the first person he had contacted to inform. Apparently, he had backed out halfway through. Long story short, we wheeled him out to the ambulance, and the bride and groom were waiting for us in the lobby. As he was leaving with the crew, he told the bride he was sorry. He hadn't meant to do it on their wedding day, but he loved her too much to go through with it. They had a brief exchange, and then he was whisked away. The bride was furious. Apparently, he handed her a letter listing reasons why they were supposed to be together. Meanwhile, the groom was completely dumbfounded. He had no idea, one of the most ridiculous and awkward things I've ever seen at a wedding. Oh, and the groomsman was fine. He made a full recovery. Not sure if they're still in touch, though. Story 28. I used to be a bouncer at a nightclub that was part of a major hotel in San Francisco. People would often have their wedding receptions at the hotel and then head to the club afterward. One night, a couple, just 2 hours fresh from the altar, arrived with their party. They were all pretty drunk, but the bride was beyond wasted, stumbling into people, being loud, and trying to cross the VIP rope I was guarding. Well, she made it past the rope, and while I was trying to persuade her back, she started getting close to me and said, "You think you can handle me?" Her husband was about 3 feet away, jaw on the floor. I asked him to control his wife, and he finally snapped out of his shock. He grabbed her wrist and dragged her out of the club, swearing up a storm. I still feel bad for the guy. Story 29. I worked for a timeshare company as a supervisor over the phone, so I handled all the escalated calls from upset owners. One couple was spending their honeymoon in Aruba. They had it all planned, a nice walk along the beach under the moonlight, and then back to their room to get freaky. Well, it happened to be a very humid time of year, so there were a lot of bugs. I got a call from the bride, irate, going straight to the supervisor. She blamed the timeshare company for the fact that she couldn't get in front of her new husband and be intimate, which she insisted was necessary for conceiving their first child. All because she had gotten some mosquito bites and was embarrassed to get bare. And since the beach was on the resort's property, she held the hotel responsible for her inability to get in front of her husband and get pregnant. Story 30. It wasn't even remotely close to a honeymoon hotspot, and that was the sad part. I was 18 and working night shift at a particularly crappy open-air motel, right next to the nicest hotel in town, which wasn't saying much. A young couple came in practically in tears because the honeymoon suite they had booked at the nicer hotel had been rented out to someone else and there was nowhere else to stay. They ended up at our motel, the only place in town with a single room available. I felt terribly sorry for them, gave them the biggest discount I could, and let them into that last tiny crappy room. While they were getting their luggage, I remembered the suite right above the office that was usually rented out as an apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was the best we had. I didn't say anything to the couple right away. Instead, I went upstairs and did my best to scrub off the dust and spiders and wipe down the linoleum with a bleach rag. It took me about an hour, and I was pretty proud of myself for getting the room ready as quickly as I had, given the generally decrepit condition it was usually left in. I threw the bleach rags and dirty linens in the laundry room and went to bring the couple to their fancy-ish new suite. I knocked, but no one came to the door. The new husband eventually asked what I needed, and I told them about their room. I was a little puzzled that they didn't seem to want to leave, even just to check it out. They didn't come to the door or turn on the lights, and the bride kept giggling. I made my way back to the front office, figuring they must have been really tired after such a long day. They sounded a lot happier than when they first arrived, so I concluded that my efforts hadn't been a total waste. Story 31. I am not a honeymoon hotspot worker, but I do have a good story at a resort with honeymooners. When I was 19, I went to Hilton Head, South Carolina with my girlfriend at the time, her mother and her brother. We were staying in a timeshare that her mom and uncles shared, and it was a pretty nice place. One night, my girlfriend and I decided to go out to the hot tub for some alone time. However, there was already a couple there. We decided to go in anyway. The bride was really personable and started a conversation with us right away. That's when we found out they were on their honeymoon. We all kept talking, and after a bit, they offered us some of the champagne they had, which we eagerly accepted. After the bottle was finished, we were all trying to decide what to do next. My girlfriend and I had planned on smoking and decided to ask the couple if they wanted some, since they had been kind enough to share their champagne. They accepted right away and invited us over to where they were staying. We smoked and drank wine with them until we were all pretty gone. That's when the couple started getting really emotional and serious. They told us that we were a cute couple and that we were young, so we shouldn't get ourselves tied down so early. From what they were saying, it almost seemed like they were having some reservations about their own marriage, which made things really awkward for us. My girlfriend and I exchanged looks, trying to find a way out, as the night was taking a turn we did not want. Then she got a call from her brother asking where we were. We used that call as our exit. We said goodbye, congratulated them again, and left. That night and that couple has stuck with me over the years. I honestly hope everything worked out well for them, because they were really cool and genuinely nice people. Story 32. This just happened a few days ago. I work at an upscale hotel chain on the coast in Florida. We get a lot of international guests. This couple wasn't on their honeymoon, but they were clearly married and on a special trip. They were both French and in their late 60s. I was working at the pool when the husband walked up looking for a towel. As he approached, I saw his wife pull out a bottle of wine and take a serious sip straight from it. We had a no-glass policy on the pool deck, and not wanting to make a scene, I grabbed a couple of plastic cups and asked the husband if he could pour their wine into the cups. He looked really outraged and offended and said, "My wife doesn't drink alcohol." I was pretty confused but told him, "Whatever it is, could you put it in the cups?" He took the cups and walked back to their chairs. After a heated conversation, she stormed off, giving me a witheringly dirty look as she left. I walked over to the husband, apologizing and explaining, I didn't mean to upset them, just doing my job. It turned out she was an alcoholic and had been pretending to be sober. The husband ended up crying a little as he tried to explain what the big deal was. It was pretty awkward, but I think it was probably for the best that it came out into the open. Story 33. This probably doesn't count as a honeymoon hotspot. I worked at a Dairy Queen. Anyway, a couple came up to the counter, gushing and talking about how they had just gotten married a few days ago. They were clearly hoping someone would compact their first shared blizzard. What they didn't realize was that I knew the girl involved from a church-related activity, no less. The relationship was just distant enough that she didn't recognize me without context. Clearly they were dating or friends or something, trying to get free ice cream. If she had truly been engaged, I would have known. Anyway, I said in my sweetest voice, "Sure, and congrats." Her face was priceless as I said her name, both at the time and later when I saw her among church people. Totally worth the money I had to eat for the blizzard.
Story 34. I worked at a camera and photo store near a tourist location when I was a student, back when you could get your film developed in an hour. My job was operating the big photo developing machine, a generally boring gig. Most of the time it was fully automated. Grab the film, load it, press a few buttons, wait, then take the stack of photos that came out and put them in an envelope for pickup. I had a supervisor and lab technician who monitored and calibrated the machine, so I was basically just a button-pressing minion. 90% of the time, I didn't even glance at the stack of prints that came out unless I needed to check for issues, in which case I'd get the lab technician. I always saw the top print, though, when I loaded it into the envelope, and often there would be private pictures. Occasionally, I had to flip through the photos anyway to prevent them from sticking together, so I'd see things here and there. Generally, these were not attractive people, so I never flipped through the photos. I tried not to take more than a glance if I could avoid it. Think unattractive, flabby 40-somethings in terrible hotel lighting, and you know what I mean. One time, the top photo showed a bald guy with another man. I didn't think much of it, except that the guy performing had a very noticeable facial mark, maybe a birthmark or something. Again, I didn't dwell on it, I just dropped it into the envelope, put on the code sticker, and tossed it into the box. I had forgotten about it by the time I left for lunch at a local sandwich joint. Halfway through my meal, though, I saw a man walk in. He had the exact same birthmark on his face, and he was a priest. I tried not to stare. He just bought a couple of cans of soda and walked out. For the rest of my lunch, all I could think about was that priest and the man and their little performance. I have nothing against them. It was just such a weird, intimate thing to witness in my mind. When I went back to work, I asked the girl at the cash register if a priest had picked up the photos, and she said he had. Of course, I didn't tell anyone about it, mostly because it's none of my business what a guy does on his vacation. I just hope he's happy. Story 35. Not exactly a honeymoon story, but worth sharing. I used to work at a big hotel, and one week we had a gay wedding. The ceremony and reception went well, with about 60 people in attendance. For the night, the couple had booked one of our bigger rooms, expecting around 200 guests. We set up all the tables in the buffet, and the DJ was ready for what we anticipated would be a massive night. Cut to 11 p.m., and I walk into the big room to find about 25 people and one of the grooms crying onto the other.
Unfortunately, they had booked their wedding the same weekend as our city's Gay Pride Festival, so most guests hadn't shown up, and half of the day attendees had left to attend the festival. We felt so bad for them, he just cried all night. Poor guy. Story 36. We rent out holiday homes on a weekly basis. That Saturday, the family who rented one of them didn't show up, even though they had paid €3,000 up front. No phone call or message to warn us of any delay. We tried calling them, but got no reply. In the end, we concluded they must have had an accident on the way. 2 days, and various attempts at contact later, I got a very embarrassed phone call. It turned out they had been at their own wedding feast when they were supposed to arrive back in their home country, 1,000 kilometers away. They had passed out at 5 a.m., slept through the next day, and only found our messages the following evening. The whole party had assumed someone else had told us they planned to arrive 2 days late. I was relieved they were just newlyweds rather than dead. But seriously, who goes on a honeymoon with their parents and in-laws? Story 37. I work as a manager at a resort on a Pacific island. I can't say which one because it would be too identifying. One day, a man turned up out of the blue. He seemed a bit of a downer at first, but he clearly knew his way around a cocktail bar, so I hired him as a bartender. And what a mistake that was. Within a month, he had slept with half the waitresses, and somehow a couple of newlywed brides on their honeymoons. How does someone even do that? Then one day, he disappeared just as suddenly as he had arrived. Maybe it had something to do with that guy with the seaplane. Story 38. This couple came into my store grabbing some food and beer, and we got to talking. They mentioned this was part 2 of their honeymoon since it was closer to home and very scenic. They had rented a house in Northern California instead of camping. Part 1 had been a month in Hawaii, I think Maui. A few days later, the guy came in alone and started bragging about his time in Maui. Apparently, he'd been trying to hook up with some cashier the whole trip, even taking his wedding ring off when he went into the store. Total jerk move, right? This couple came into my store grabbing some food and beer. They mentioned this was part 2 of their honeymoon since it was closer to home and very scenic. They had rented a house in Northern California instead of camping. Part 1 had been a month in Hawaii, I think Maui. Near the end of the trip, the wife came in with him, and the cashier blurted out, "You're married?" The wife was understandably suspicious, but apparently he's good at improvising because she didn't ditch him then and there. I didn't have the heart to tell her what a jerk he was. A few months later, she came back to the store with a boyfriend who wasn't a creep, really nice guy, so I guess she got divorced and is in a good relationship now. I still see them from time to time, and I am glad she ditched that jerk. As for him, I think I've seen him since too. Looking pretty tweakery, shakes and all. Story 39. I was in Cancun on vacation, and staying at my resort was a newlywed couple, wearing their husband and wife sandals and all that. They were easily the most miserable people I have ever seen. I went on an excursion, and it quickly became clear they had no money. They couldn't buy food, drinks, or anything. If they had been reasonable, I might have helped them out so they could enjoy themselves. But she was relentless and nasty, and he was a total jerk. They fought with the workers everywhere, claiming everything should be included, yelling about having to pay for beer, and being outright rude to very kind people. They were entitled and obnoxious, expecting special treatment while treating everyone poorly. On top of that, they were both unpleasant to look at, and their personalities only made it worse. Story 40. Tangentially related personal experience. On my wedding night, my wife and I were doing all the things you're supposed to do when you get back to the hotel. I was feeling pretty confident. Definitely above average performance, which is what you want on a wedding night. About 20 minutes in, the people in the room next door banged on the wall, letting us know they don't appreciate our... I grabbed a towel from the bathroom, wrapped it around my waist, and went out into the hallway to knock on their door. After a conspicuous silence, a guy finally answers, looking shocked to see me in nothing but a towel. I look him square in the eye and tell him, "It's my wedding night. No complaints from you are going to stop me from getting mine." He stammers a weak congratulations. I leave, and we head back to the room. We finish up making sure to be a little extra loud and fall asleep. Not a bad wedding night. Story 41. While working at a big hotel, we had a honeymoon suite. One day, a small fire broke out in a housekeeping closet on the same floor as the suite. Fire alarms and sprinklers went off immediately. The fire department arrived within minutes and doused the area with what felt like 10,000 gallons of water. Those hoses are huge. We ended up with about 6 inches of water on the floor, sloshing around while manually checking rooms to ensure everyone was safe, not from the fire that was out, but from the flooding. When we knocked on the honeymoon suite door, there was no answer. Walking through the living room into the bedroom, we found the honeymooners, fully engaged. Alarms, smoke, fire trucks, and sprinklers hadn't slowed them down one bit. I decided to just let them be. They were safe. When they finally left, they never mentioned the fire once. Story 42. During the short time I worked at a hotel, the only honeymoon story I picked up was this one. A young couple checked in and requested a quiet, discreet room. We put them in a far corner, which they appreciated. It was also near a guest exit where they could come and go privately. They had the room for 8 days. The first 2 days were normal. They came by the restaurant for meals, which were included, and we'd see them running off at all hours of the day or night. Even housekeeping got a break, since for 6 of the 8 nights, they had the Do Not Disturb sign up. But here's where things take a turn. On the 3rd day, a family, father, mother, and 2 kids checked in. They had a 2-bed room, and our layout had singles on one side of the hall and doubles on the other. The front desk assigned them across the hall from the honeymooners. 2 days later, on the 4th day of the honeymooners called the front desk, complaining about shouting and fighting in the hall and just outside the exit. From what I gathered after the police had to get involved, they were not listening to the manager's requests. The honeymooners were being quite loud in their room. The family with the kids grew stressed over the noise, but instead of asking the honeymooners to quiet down or calling the front desk for a room change, they just kept arguing and escalating. Eventually, the manager moved the family to a new room and comped them a night. To make up for the chaos, the honeymooners also received a complimentary night. Story 43. I will break convention and share my honeymoon story, the kind that hotspot workers probably see a lot of. Backstory. My job had a history of giving big May bonuses, which I had counted on for our honeymoon. In 2009, the company had a terrible year due to the economy and a few acquisitions. I had to take out a loan just to cover our trip. We were on a very tight budget. If it weren't for the money tree at our reception, we wouldn't have had much beyond what I had prepaid on Travelocity. I had prepaid most of our activities in Hawaii weeks in advance. The morning of our departure, I lost $100 in the couch and didn't realize it until we landed. My wife went bat crap when she found out. I don't blame her. Our honeymoon included stops at the nicest Walmart in Hawaii for Hot Pockets. The whole honeymoon had a bittersweet feeling the entire time. Most things were prepaid: food, activities, hotel, flight via Travelocity, so we still had some nice experiences planned. However, I had to put the rental car on my credit card, which maxed it out because only mid-size SUVs were available. I even had to call my bank to get a credit limit increase just so we could do more activities. It took my wife a day or two to finally calm down and start enjoying the trip. We visited a church in our denomination, and when the offering plate came around, we put in the last of our money after whispering about it. A lady behind us noticed and later gave us money for the amount we'd contributed. Sweet of her. After that, we finally started having fun. We found cheap things to do, made good memories, and when we got back home, we found the lost $100 and had a good laugh about it. TLDR, pay for your own friggin' honeymoon. Don't take out a loan. Deposit any reception money immediately, and don't prepay through travel companies. It's usually much cheaper to pay directly at the locations. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.